Welcome to the island of Erid, where chapter 14 of Kidnapper by Robert Louis Stevenson starts. And this is where I'm going to start walking the book. Day by day, I'll read you out the chapters as we go, and you can give me your impressions of both the landscape and the story through the Kidmapper blog or other web services, where if you search for Kidmapper, you'll probably find me. Anyway, here's your bedtime story for today. Chapter 14, The Islet. With my stepping ashore, I began the most unhappy part of my adventures. There was no sound of man or cattle, not a cock crew. Only the surf broke outside in the distance, which put me in mind of my perils and those of my friend. To walk by the sea at that hour of the morning and in a place so desert-like and lonesome struck me with a kind of fear. As soon as the day began to break, I put on my shoes and climbed a hill, the ruggedest scramble I ever undertook, falling the whole way between big blocks of granite or leaping from one to another. When I got to the top, the dawn was come. There was no sign of the brig, which must have lifted from the reef and sunk. The boat, too, was nowhere to be seen. There was never a sail upon the ocean, and in what I could see of the land was neither house nor man. So I set off eastward along the south coast, hoping to find a house where I might warm myself and perhaps get news of those I had lost. After a little, my way was stopped by a creek or inlet of the sea, which seemed to run pretty deep into the land, and as I had no means to get across, I must needs change my direction to go about the end of it. It was still the roughest kind of walking. Indeed, the whole, not only of Erid, but of the neighbouring part of Mull, which they call the Ross, is nothing but a jumble of granite rocks with heather in among. At first, the creek kept narrowing as I had looked to see, but presently, to my surprise, it began to widen out again. At this I scratched my head, but had still no notion of the truth, until at last I came to a rising ground, and it burst upon me all in a moment that I was cast upon a little barren isle, and cut off on every side by the salt seas. Well, it's not cut off today, I just want to tell you that. It's silted up quite a lot, so you can walk across it, so if you want to come here, you can. I stood in the rain and shivered and wondered what to do. The time I spent upon the island is still so horrible a thought to me that I must pass it lightly over. In all the books I have read of people cast away, they had either their pockets full of tools or a chest of things would be thrown upon the beach along with them as if on purpose. My case was very different. I had nothing in my pockets but money and Allen's silver button, and being inland bred, I was as much short of knowledge as of means. Okay, so I haven't got a silver button, but I have picked up a silverish, well, white really shell, from Erid, and I shall carry this with me all the way through to Edinburgh, sometime in August, hopefully. So if you want to meet me there, I'll give you this shell if you're the first person I meet. I knew indeed that shellfish, there we are, were counted good to eat, and among the rocks of the isle I found a great plenty of limpets, which at first I could scarcely strike from their places, not knowing quickness to be needful. There were besides some of the little shells that we call buckies. I think periwinkle is the English name. Remember, this guy's Scottish. Of these two I had my whole diet, devouring them cold and raw as I found them, and so hungry was I that at first they seemed to me delicious. Perhaps they were out of season, or perhaps there was something wrong in the sea about my island, but at least I had no sooner eaten my first meal than I was seized with giddiness and retching, and lay for a long time no better than dead. Okay, I haven't tried to eat a barnacle yet, but if you email me or message me or comment on the blog and dare me to do it, I will. All day it streamed rain, the island ran like a sop, there was no dry spot to be found, and when I lay down that night between two boulders that made a kind of roof, my feet were in a bog. Well, I'm glad I've got boots. I'm not doing this barefoot, and neither should you. Now, the creek or straits that cut off the isle from the mainland of the Ross opened out on the north into a bay, and the bay again opened into the Sound of Iona. I've got some photos of that. And it was the neighbourhood of this place that I chose to be my home, though if I had thought upon the very name of home in such a spot, I must have burst out weeping. There was in this part of the isle a little hut of a house, like a pig's hut, where fishers used to sleep when they came there upon their business. Now, I couldn't find that. Anybody got ideas? That would be useful. But the turf roof of it had fallen entirely in, so that the hut was of no use to me and gave me less shelter than my rocks. What was more important, the shellfish on which I lived grew there in great plenty. When the tide was out, I could gather a peck at a time, and this was doubtless a convenience. But the other reason went deeper. I had become in no way used to the horrid solitude of the isle, but still looked round me on all sides like a man that was hunted, between fear and hope that I might see some human creature coming. Now, from a little up the hillside over the bay, I could catch a sight of the great ancient church and the roofs of the people's houses in Iona, and on the other hand, over the low country of the Ross, I saw smoke go up morning and evening, as if from a homestead in a hollow of the land. I used to watch this smoke when I was wet and cold and had my head half turned with loneliness, and think of the fireside and the company till my heart burned. It was the same with the roofs of Iona. Altogether, this sight I had of men's homes and comfortable lives, although it put a point on my own sufferings, yet it kept both hope alive and helped me to eat my raw shellfish, and saved me from the sense of horror I had whenever I was quite alone with dead rocks and fowls and the rain and the cold sea. Now then, there is a pretty high rock on the northwest of Erid, which, because it had a flat top and overlooked the sound, I was much in the habit of frequenting. Again, I think you can see some photographs of that on the blog if you want to look. As soon, however, as the sun came out, I lay down on the top of that rock to dry myself. The comfort of the sunshine is a thing I cannot tell. It set me thinking hopefully of my deliverance, of which I had begun to despair, and I scanned the sea and the Ross with fresh interest. Well, all of a sudden, a coble with a brown sail and a pair of fishers aboard it came flying round that corner of the isle, bound for Iona. I shouted out and then fell on my knees on the rock and reached up my hands and prayed to them. They were near enough to hear. I could even see the colour of their hair, and there was no doubt that they observed me, but they cried out in the Gaelic tongue and laughed. But the boat never turned aside, and it flew on right before my eyes for Iona. I couldn't believe such wickedness and ran along the shore from rock to rock, crying on them piteously. Even after they were out of reach of my voice, I still cried and waved to them, and when they were quite gone, I thought my heart would have burst. All the time of my troubles I wept only twice. Once when I couldn't reach the yard, and now the second time when these fishers turned a deaf ear to my cries. But this time I wept and roared like a wicked child, tearing up the turf with my nails and grinding my face in the earth. If a wish would kill men, these two fishers would never have seen the morning, and I should likely have died upon my island. So now we'll move to what we're doing tomorrow. The next day, I found my bodily strength run very low. But the sun shone, the air was sweet, and what I managed to eat of the shellfish agreed well with me and revived my courage. I was back on my rock, where I went always the first thing I had eaten, before I observed a boat coming down the sound, and with her head, as I thought, in my direction. I began at once to hope and fear exceedingly, for I thought these men might have thought better of their cruelty and be coming back to my assistance. As soon as they were come within easy speech, they let down their sail and they lay quiet. In spite of my supplications, they drew no nearer in, and what frightened me most of all, the new man tee-heed with laughter as he talked and looked at me. Then he stood up in the boat and addressed me a long while, speaking fast and with many wavings of his hand. And I told him I had no Gaelic, and at this he became very angry, and I began to suspect he thought he was talking English. Listening very close, I caught the word whatever several times, but all the rest was Gaelic, or might have been Greek and Hebrew for me. Whatever, I said, to show him I had caught a word. Yes, 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 says he, and then he looked up at the other men as much as to say, I told you I spoke English, and began again as hard as ever in the Gaelic. This time I picked out another word, tide. Then I had a flash of hope. I remembered he was always waving his hand towards the mainland of the Ross. Do you mean when the tide is out? I cried and could not finish. Yes, yes, said he, tide. At that, I turned tail upon their boat, where my adviser had once more begun to tee-hee with laughter, leapt back the way I had come from one stone to another, and set off running across the isle as I had never run before. In about half an hour, I came out upon the shores of the creek, and sure enough, it was shrunk into a little trickle of water, through which I dashed, not above my knees, and landed with a shout upon the mainland.